that's quote unquote has passed on in flesh. And Rasta basically up until now, has basically made a stance that the emperor is alive, and shall appear unto I and I again when that time comes, and that time is soon. And when the time does come, it's not like, like a Jesus story where heaven descends, to the earth. It simply means that here's a man of reputable character, integrity, dignity, respected by all peoples in all different places of the world in all ranks and hierarchies. And when he is present amongst us, that people honor him. People would respect his wise words. People would respect his way forward for the world, as this is the manifestation of that which is divine in physical form. And that's Rastafari's claim again, that in terms of spiritual faith or religion, that we're the only ones that can claim that God is in flesh and is alive. Not only so, but the same God in flesh and who is alive has visited us in 1966, the 21st of April. 3 years exactly after the Coral Gardens massacre of Rastafari in 1963, when the state, along with the Jamaican people, bottles, so it was aggressively done. The average Jamaican citizen resorted to vigilantism, something that was outlawed by the colonial government the decade before in the 50s. Lo and behold, there's high levels of vigilantism just 8 months after Jamaica's independence. So in the most immediate post-independent, aspect of Jamaica, we are excluding Rastafari. And if we exclude Rastafari, I'm sure that we have found ways to exclude the Maroon community, which are our two indigenous communities here in Jamaica. So when Jamaicans received or when independence was granted, let me rather say, because we didn't fight for anything. It was a gift granted to us by the Queen. So when independence was granted, to the Jamaican people, Rastafari was not included. Equal citizenship, was not honored, was not respected. So immediately after independence, Jamaica, the state of Jamaica turned against its citizens, the Rastafari. And this was not the first that it has done this, because there has been other atrocities, from the 30s leading straight up, until the present actually. Maybe less beatings, no, but there is heavy, persecution, especially as it relates to, I holy sacrament, yeah. Big up Westmoreland. This is where the highest grade in Jamaica grows. All right?
Nice.
Yes, nice. A nice skunk. Yeah. But as I was saying, His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie visits the Rastaman 3 years after the Coral Gardens incident. And it was actually one of Jamaica's only consensus. There was a consensus. I think the Queen was supposed to come, or even the Pope of Rome. And the Jamaican people chose the Emperor Haile Selassie I, the Rastaman's God. This is who they were interested in coming into the island to see and perhaps to speak to. And this is what happened. And since then, immediately, after His Majesty leaves, Rasta is allowed to integrate into Jamaican society. This is 4 years after independence. And not properly so, up till this day. Not properly so. Last year was Jamaica's 50th anniversary of being independent, because you're not independent, you're independent, right? As long as you have IMF, telling you what to do, and how to freeze, the wages of civil servants, when everything, the cost of living and everything else is rising, so Jamaica will never be independent unless it becomes independent.
I hear you.
Right? So the Rastaman now is free to go to school. Give thanks because decades after, I have received the privilege, while having my locks and beard, to experience a tertiary level education. My program was the African and African Diaspora Studies program at the University of the West Indies, Social Sciences, Department of Government, where I also have 2 minors, and one in political science and the other in criminology. So give thanks that the way has been paved, for subsequent generations. We have come under less, aggression, from the state and from the citizens of Jamaica, because of that path that was paved for us by our ancestors and leaders of our communities, and which include the Emperor Haile Selassie I himself, Earth's rightful ruler. Because what you need is justice all over the world. And Haile Selassie once said, this is not a direct quotation, in my summation, what was said in my memory, that the world is talking about wars and discussing rumors of wars when everyone is crying out for peace. War is being discussed. War is high on the agenda when peace is being most demanded. So once again, Rastafari said burn the room. You hear next Rast say burn Babylon.
Yeah.
But I know I can follow the emperor because I never hear the emperor use the term Babylon. That's too far off. We know ancient Babylon, and the Babylonians in history, to me, in my own personal research, experienced a high culture. They were scientific, sophisticated people. So I don't see the Babylonians as nothing negative because, Jews were held captive. That's the Jews, and they're biased against Babylon. But I burn the Rome government because I hear the Emperor Haile Selassie I burn also the Rome government. There's always been this competition between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. Western Christianity has always wanted to assume, cultural hegemony over Eastern Christianity. When you don't even have as many debtors as the Eastern Orthodox faith. The Western Catholic Church has less debtors and less literature. The East has more literature. And literature is more ancient, and more original, authentic, so there's always this rift between Eastern Christianity and the West, and the West has made serious attempts into getting into Ethiopia and to take over the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and to Christianize Africa and the Horn of Africa, with its Western aspect of Christianity, especially when there has, a more Eastern perspective as according to other African countries. That's kind of more Roman Catholic or whatever, not so in Ethiopia. That the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, assumes cultural hegemony over the people. Up until this day, it doesn't matter how many Muslims live in the land or communists. It is the world, it is the Ethiopian Crown Council of Churches, who has a lot of say up to this day in Ethiopia. And before a king can be coronated or even an emperor, it has to be through the agreement of the Ethiopian Crown Council, so just to highlight who the enemy is, from a Rastafari perspective, it is the Rome government and those influenced by the Rome government, and by extent, people would generally just say Babylon entirely. It would include Obama, everybody else. This includes Castro. We here in Jamaica honor Castro. We respect him, for his, his integrity, his strength, his role in freeing up Angola, from its struggles in Africa, and assisting in its independence struggle, and these are ways that we need to also remember the Emperor Haile Selassie, because this is how Ethiopia extends its hands, to the world. Ethiopia stretches her hands out, to God. It does so by assisting, Africa in its independent struggles. Thus, the Organization of African Unity is formulated in 1958, headquartered in Addis Ababa. Haile Selassie's Ethiopia. Ethiopia being the only country in Africa, who is not under colonialism, who has never been conquered by a colonial power, who has always maintained its sovereignty. So it made sense that the Organization of African Unity be headquartered in Haile Selassie's Ethiopia, the capital Addis Ababa. And in that same year, 1958, Ghana receives its independence. Kwame Nkrumah takes the Pan-African agenda that he was exposed to while studying in the West, in Africa's diaspora, and brings that Pan-African agenda to Africa. Thus, African leaders become Pan-Africanists, and they use this as a way forward. The philosophy of Pan-Africanism basically explains that, Africa must be free, and Africa must be one. And by freedom from colonial rule, and independent also, even in terms of economics, right? To the extent to which Kwame Nkrumah, his economic policy was more of a non-alignment one, and the Emperor Haile Selassie warned him about that you needed to engage the world, in economics. You can't just lock yourself off away from the world. You must trade, you must participate, you must engage. And several other countries, including Kenya with Jomo Kenyatta, Kenya is free. And most of the African countries become independent in the 1960s through the Organization of African Unity. Just another single yet major contribution made by His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. And all people of African and African descent, must definitely give thanks, for the Emperor's contribution. His contributions, has always been superb, undoubtedly. Leading forward now to Rastafari, and here in Jamaica, we would expect that people would misinterpret, Rastafari and the Rastafari struggles, and nothing is wrong, with that. There are always misinterpretations, but the story, must be told, in a particular manner, given that we must remember that most religions, spiritual faiths, in its first century of formation and development, was highly persecuted against. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Prophet Muhammad had to run to Egypt. He had to run for his life, to Ethiopia. To the extent to which when the Muslims led the jihads, even after the Muhammad's death, they went even into Sudan, and when they made attempts to go into Ethiopia, the hierarchy amongst them said, no, not the land of Ethiopia. That is a special land. That is the land of the ancestors. That is the land that assisted, the people who assisted the Muhammad, when he was in his distress, and this is how Islam took root into Ethiopia. The Prophet Muhammad resided there for years, developing his program, reviving, gaining his energy and his strength and his vitality to continue his struggle. And it was well done. Islam is one of our major world religions right now. So although I tried Rastafari, I acknowledge the contributions that people make towards people's spiritual upliftment, and big up Muhammad, of Islam. I respect, such leaders who come to bail out their people, definitely in a time of need, and based on Arab history and the barbaric type of mentality and living conditions that Islam helped to civilize, the Arab community. And I think also that's why the Arab community, would acknowledge this Prophet Muhammad as, the only prophet of Allah, that there is no more, all credit is due. And likewise, to Rastafari, Haile Selassie, in terms of what he has done for I, in terms of the vision that, others received before I, such as the Honorable Prophet Marcus Garvey, telling Africans in the diaspora to look to the east to the crowning of a king, he shall be your redeemer. That's well understood by us to this day, and that's why we give credit to Marcus Garvey also as John the Baptist, one who would pave the way, for Christ's coming, and baptism. And this was John Marcus Garvey, as he's known by the Bubbles, But interestingly, in Jamaican history, as you would have the Bobo Ashanti, in Jamaican history, the Ashanti people of Ghana were more numerable here in Jamaica. In terms of their numbers, they had greater numbers here. So whereas you would have Jamaican people, from Yoruba descent and Igbo, that Ashanti presence in our bloodline is more dominant than any other tribe, of people in Africa. So the Jamaican would know that, if you ask the average Jamaican, where he's from in Africa, he would tell you Ghana. Not just because that's where the point of no return is. It's because, this is what you're taught. Your linguistics speak to that. Your culture, your metaphysics, burial rites, 9-night practices and rituals, practiced here in Jamaica, and by those in Ghana. Okay. Some people tell me that, when they go to Ghana, Ghana reminds them of Jamaica. And the Jamaican people remind them of people in Ghana. So there's definitely a cultural connection and a biological one. When His Majesty, as I said, is coronated in Ethiopia now, that Rastafari, who already kind of practice certain metaphysical rituals that, have come from out of Christianity, mixed with, African metaphysics as well, because the original Rastas were also readers of the Bible. Not all were illiterate. Some read and were inspired by the Bible. Some saw themselves as the people of the Bible. Uh, Barry Shavans would probably argue that that is as a Rasta seen himself as a Jew or an African Hebrew Israelite may be the result of his introduction to the Bible by the Europeans, who enslaved, the African. The same story of the Jews being enslaved in Egypt, a similar story that reminds you of, your present situation and condition, and this is what is argued by Professor Barry Shavans, the late Professor Barry Shavans, former Dean of the Social Sciences Faculty of the University of the West Indies. I respect Professor Shavans as a scholar, but sometimes the scholars are a bit objective in their research or in areas of certain aspects of their research where I feel they should be more subjective. Because if Barry Shavans was more subjective, then he would understand that it's not as an introduction, as a result of the introduction of the Bible to the African, why he began to read about Israel and identifying, but it was actually the sounding of a trumpet, which is also prophetical, that at the sounding of a trumpet, all that which was scattered, even unto the islands of the sea, shall be gathered. Now, if this is a prophecy speaking about the children of Israel being scattered to the four corners of the earth, with reference being made to the islands of the sea, it means exactly, if you're going to accept the prophecy, if you're going to believe it, hold it as truth, it means that Israel is scattered to the four corners of the earth, and that you should be able to find them even on an island like Jamaica. And if so, you won't be finding a brown man. You'll be finding a black Ethiopian like myself, highly melanated, yet a Hebrew Cushite same way. Leaving Palestine, during the Assyrian exile, 722 BC. This is a part of my history, so I could speak it. Meaning that I can claim right to Israel and Palestine just like any Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jew. So as I quote my history, in 722 it is known as an Assyrian exile of the children of Israel, and during less than 200 years later, 150 years later, there's a Babylonian exile of the children of Israel, right? And during these two exiles, the children of Israel predominantly went into Egypt, Black Africa, leaving Egypt, going as far as into Sudan. And there's a linkage between Sudan and Chad, because you have what is known as the Chad-Nile region. And when that river Nile ends in Chad, a couple hundred miles is the Niger River. So it makes sense that there's a straight migration from Northeast Africa, ancient Palestine, Northeast Africa, which would be modern-day Palestine, to Egypt, to Sudan and Ethiopia, cross into Western Sudan, into Chad, along the Chad-Nile River region, and onto the Niger River, leading into West Africa and Nigeria. So people like the Igbo have a right to claim themselves as Hebrew Israelites. The Yoruba, also in Nigeria, have that right. The Akan-speaking people, which includes the Ashanti. And in our Jamaican history, that's all we hear about, is the dominance of the Ashanti in terms of spirituality, in terms of language, culture, warfare. It was the Ashanti. So by right, the Jamaican people, by extent, also have that claim to Israel. And people say that, how do you know someone is a Jew? Like, he tests his blood, and scholars should come here and start testing. Might as well. Because according to Rastafari, and from a Rastafari perspective, which is a perspective that I hold, though I personally also go beyond Israel, So although I can call myself an African Hebrew Israelite, I can call myself much more because what's in my blood. I can go beyond Israel. I can go to the first man.
So, who can become a Rastafari? Can anybody become a Rastafari, or is it only certain people, or how's that work?
Rastafari is a inborn concept, right? So nobody not just become Rasta, you know. Just like in Christianity, you know, and maybe even in Judaism, Jews probably believe that you're born a Jew, if not physically so, spiritually so. Christians believe something similar, that spiritually we're all Jews, yet everyone is born a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Well, according to Rastafari, everybody who become Rastafari, born Rastafari, and that there's no way to become Rastafari any other way other than an inborn concept. So you're chosen from before you're even in your mother's womb to become Rasta, and that when that time comes for you to manifest yourself is when a particular enlightenment and a reminder of who you are. Just like, we must say that when Jesus Christ, was 10 and 11, I'm sure he didn't understand the fullness of him, of being who he is. As the African proverb would say, know thyself. I'm sure Christ didn't know himself at age 10, 11. In fact, he was schooled by his parents, and at age 12 was taken to the Passover for the first time. And there's a gap between when he's 12 and when he's 30. And it's interesting what happens between that period is he becomes more and more in tune with who he is and his mission on earth. So, he has to fulfill something. And he chose himself to do this. People are usually, people say God chooses people. People usually choose themselves. They're usually convicted, that conviction usually comes and they're inspired, to do good. As some are inspired to do wickedly as well. So, it's an inborn concept. However, there are ways that, persons become close to Rastafari. They begin to learn more about Rastafari. They begin to grow the locks. Yet, they don't accept the Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia as Earth's rightful ruler, as God divine, narrator, creator, that divinity. And that's what makes you a Rasta. And this is how you'll know who is a Rasta from who is not a Rasta. That what is most central about Rastafari is the Emperor Haile Selassie I.
Right. How many Rasta people are there in total?
In the world?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. And it's best that I say I don't know. Because
an estimation maybe?
I have never read or come across